Today we're going to talk about the difference between fixed and fluid elements in a street photograph. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Candid Frame YouTube channel. I've been away for a while. I just got back from Washington, D.C., where I was in attendance at the Focused on the Story Photo Festival. It's a photo festival that is dedicated to telling stories with photography. So a lot of it was like photojournalism, documentary photography, and some street photography, and it was an amazing event. The people there were so genuine and generous, and it was just a great place to be, despite DC's notorious humidity. It was pretty bad, especially for a Cali boy to have to contend with. But that's a small thing considering the wealth of inspiration and networking that was available there. So if you didn't attend it this year, I really recommend that you check it out next year. And I hope to be there for year 3 of the event. And as I mentioned, I taught a 2-day workshop there. And whenever I'm teaching in person, it really provides me an opportunity not only to share what I know and what I love about photography, but it also allows me to sort of think about the way that I teach and how I teach, especially the different principles that I talk about. And one of the things that I kind of reinforced over the 2 days with students was how to analyze a scene as you're evaluating it, as you're walking the streets making pictures. And I pointed out that whenever you see something or a scene you want to photograph, there are certain elements that are fixed, things that are not going to move and not going to change during the time that you're going to stand there considering a photograph. And then there are other things that are going to be more fluid, that are going to change. And the fixed elements allow you the time to actually find your composition, to see exactly what you're going to include and exclude from the frame, whether you're going to go horizontal, vertical, whether you're going to step closer, you're going to take a few steps back. And then the fluid elements are going to be those things like people moving through the scene, be the whole body of the person, their feet, their hands, shadows against a wall, cars moving through the scene. And I think one of the things that's which often results in images being weak is that people aren't really considering things beyond their subject. And I was suggesting that people take a look at what's fixed and what's fluid in the scenes that they're considering and allow that information to help them to build and make a photograph that doesn't result in an image where you have a really great subject, but you have all these other elements that you really didn't consider when you were making the photograph. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some pictures. Okay, here we have a shot by Keith Vaughton. This was made with a Fujifilm X100T at 1,000th of a second, f3.6, ISO 200. Now, this is a great street scene. You have this facade for this building that's behind. You have a great door. You have the storefronts to the left and to the right. And the light here is fantastic. You have this light, which may have been in the early morning or late afternoon, that is being cut off by the building, I assume, which is positioned behind the photographer, because you can see the shadows, especially underneath the right above the door, is falling directly below the different areas in the facade, so you can really tell where the sun is coming. And so it obscures the area in the foreground largely to shadow. That's why the woman's face, who is walking within the shadow area, is rendered into silhouette, because the exposure is biased for the highlight, and a lot of other shadow details are rendered into black. The other element that the photographer is using here is the top of the car, and the reflection that it causes helps take what would normally be just an area of shadow and reflects back the area that's being illuminated in front of the camera, the facade that I just mentioned. Now, the building itself, the car, the reflection in the car, all of that, those are fixed elements. For the time being, nothing else is going to change. And when you have a scene like this is 90% of the work. You got great light and shadow, you got line and shape, you have color. And so you can compose your shot and consider how much of the scene, how much of the reflection you want to consider for the composition. And you can see in the right-hand corner, you have a diagonal slash of light there. There's some light at the far right. And on the left-hand side, you have not only the other door there with that sign that says fire escape, keep clear, but immediately to the left, you have another storefront, which looks like there are some clothes behind the display window. And so you can take a look at this entire scene, and even before a subject comes into the frame, you can figure out exactly what you want your composition to be and set your exposure and what all. And then at that point, you wait for the fluid element. And in this case, it's the woman walking through the scene who's perfectly positioned so that her profile, her nose, her forehead, her lips are just a couple of centimeters from that shadow to the right-hand side. So if that subject had moved further in, you wouldn't have that perfect profile, that silhouette, because her face would blend into the shadow. So the choice becomes, as people are moving through the scene, where do you want your subjects? She's in a great spot. I love the way that the profile of her face is just about to disappear into shadow. Some other people might have wanted someone in the very center of the frame. To me, I really like that woman on the right, but to make it even more complex, I would have loved to have seen not only her there, but a second person walking the opposite way in front of the blue door to create not only a sort of balance to the composition, but also a sense of tension as two people are moving to the opposing sides of the frame. And the great thing about a scene like this is because you've done all the heavy lifting with the composition, all you need to do is just stand there and wait as different people move through the scene. This is a wonderful shot with that solitary figure in the frame. But once I get that shot, I always challenge myself to think, how much more can I add to this frame before it falls apart and before something changes dramatically, like the light or the car is driven off and is no longer there to be used as an element. When you have something like this and you know that the overall composition is so strong, don't just settle on just that single image, because you're not likely to discover something more interesting and that has more potential than this scene here. Don't be in a rush to run around the corner thinking that there's going to be another great shot. Milk this for as much as you can before the scene, the light, the car changes and moves, and the potential of the scene is then gone. Okay, here we have a shot by Manuel Martins. This was created with a Fujifilm X100F, 1/800th of a second, f9, ISO 200. So this is very similar to the previous shot, in which the setting itself is right there. You got light and shadow, line and shape, and color. Yes, it's a toilet, but take a step back and stop looking at it literally and just consider just the graphic elements here, especially the repetition of lines, of shape, of color that are everywhere in this shot. And you can see that Manuel took some thought into making this composition because of the way he includes the shadow in the upper right-hand corner, the sign that's indicating a left-hand turn, the yellow elements, the barriers, the WC, the water closet sign there, the line graphic on the bottom of the lower right-hand corner of the frame. All of these elements are fixed. They're not moving. They're not changing. And it allows you, or Manuel in this case, to make the composition, to figure out how far from the scene do I want to stand? Do I want to get closer, further back? What do I want to include? What do I want to exclude? And you find the beginning parts of your composition. And at that point, you wait for the fluid elements, which in this case is the shadow of the person in the right-hand corner. So as long as you have your setting, all you're really paying attention to at that point is what's happening in the right-hand corner. It could be a single shadow. It could be multiple shadows. It could be someone walking into the scene so that you get a part of them, let's say a leg or their entire body in the frame, which you are going to place in this area in order to fill up the negative space that's made up by the facade of this structure, of this bathroom area here. We need something there in order to create a visual balance. And even though the shadow isn't a large element, it's just enough to strike a nice balance for the whole composition. And the thing is that once you find the setting and once you find your composition and you're paying attention to what's happening in terms of the fluid element, you have to make sure that you stay locked into your composition, because what can happen, and I see it a lot when I'm teaching students this principle, is that they'll see their subject and then they'll start moving their camera in order to emphasize the subject. And what happens is they lose the composition. They start compromising what they spent some time establishing, and because the subject is fluid and moving, they start making the subject the priority. And all of a sudden, when they look at their composition later, they realize they've weakened it because they started thinking about the subject is more important than the stage that they had set. So once you find a setting like this and you've locked down your composition and your framing, just stick to it and allow the fluid elements of the subject to move into the scene exactly where you determined you needed them to be in order to strike a nice balance in the composition. And the other thing is, don't just settle for just one thing. In this case, this one figure here adds a nice element to the composition, but what happens if you have 2 or 3 shadows and profiles of people in the scene? What if you have 1 or 2 people coming through the scene here? How can you challenge yourself to make it a little more complicated? One of the things I'm often doing is once I've established a simple shot like this with a solitary figure, I'll go, well, what happens if I add 2 or 3 shadows? What happens if I include, a person's leg or one person in the frame? I try to exhaust all the possibilities and not just settle on one, because what I think may be my best shot may not be. That if I wait there for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes until the scene plays out, that there may be something better if I just practice a little patience and see what else the world has to reveal to me. All right, if you want to contribute images to the Candid Frame Flickr poll, all you need to do is go to Flickr, do a search in the Candid Frame. You'll see a URL right here on your screen, and just ask to be added. But you have to do it on your computer. If you try to do it on your phone or tablet, you'll get a notification that this is a private group and it's by invitation only. You can ignore that. There's a problem with trying to add yourself to a group if you're using one of those 2 devices. You have to do it on your computer. But once you do that, I'll be glad to approve it. I usually get to it once a week, and you can contribute to the thousands and thousands of photographs that people are sharing here and that I pull from when doing these videos. So check it out, and I look forward to seeing some of your photographs. Okay, here we have a shot by Gustavo Minas. We don't have any XF data here. Now, this is a beautiful image that reminds me of the work of Saul Leiter, a photographer who you don't know of. I suggest you do a Google search on him. He's really remarkable. He passed away probably about 3 or so years ago. Just wonderful use of light and reflections, and really an outstanding talent. And Gustavo here makes for a really interesting shot. It looks to me as if he's shooting through a window, and then we have these figures that are right in front of the window with umbrellas, and then we have the reflection of a woman passing through the scene with an umbrella, and then we have what looks to be either a bus or a metro train moving through the scene. There may be more than one in this frame, and it's a very beautiful abstract scene, but it really speaks to this idea of both fixed and fluid. The previous 2 scenes have included buildings, which are not going to be moving at all. Here, we have some fixed elements that are not moving for a moment in time. We have, let's assume that they're buses that they're in the background. They're stopping to unload and board passengers. So for that moment, while they are stopped, they're going to be fixed. And then we have the people in the foreground here who are in umbrellas, who are possibly waiting to either mount onto the train, or they're just standing there for a moment. So again, for a moment, they're fixed elements. The fluid elements here is the woman who's walking through the scene with the umbrella overhead, with a little light being reflected on the lenses of her glasses. I really love the grip of the hand on the neck of the umbrella handle. It really is a really wonderful moment. But like the previous two shots, why is this shot remarkable? Light and shadow, line and shape, color, and then the gesture is the woman moving through the scene. Now, I don't know how long the fixed elements were here. It may have been less than a minute before the buses moved or the person in the foreground with the umbrella moved. Not the woman, but the umbrella that's prominent in the foreground moved. But it's still the same sensibility. Looking at what is going to be fixed here, whether it's going to be an element that's fixed for hours or just for a minute, that gives you the luxury of finding your composition in your time, in that time, and then waiting for the flourish, in this case, the woman. Now, it could have been pure luck. He could have just, been positioned here, saw this woman, and raised the camera up and made the shot. But I get the feeling that he found the setting first and that the woman came later. And the reason I say that is, if you take a look at the frame, you see this small area here that the woman is framed in. That is such a small area. And if he saw the woman at that moment and didn't have the camera to his eye, by the time he brought the camera up and pressed the button, she would be gone. He would have to have incredibly fast reflexes. What I think, and Gustavo in the notes, he can put some comments in there, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect that he saw the scene, he saw that little window of opportunity, composed the shot, and then made shots of different people moving through that frame, and then eventually it paid off with this woman who's just perfectly cast for that moment. That's the way I would read into use what I'm seeing here in order to create a great photograph. Yeah, there are shots that are made by people just having fast reflexes. They see something, they raise the camera to their eye, and they make the shot. But there's so much that's working here. I think that there was a little more thoughtfulness happening here than just a case of quick reflexes. I've seen some of Gustavo's other work, and he has a very good control of his composition. So I think he's practicing something along the lines of what I'm suggesting to you. But Gustavo, if you're watching this, if you can leave a little note below, or in the notes for the video would be even better, be greatly appreciated. But you can see here, and with the other two shots, how this approach can really help you build really strong compositions that aren't completely reliant on just having an interesting subject that is so dominant that it doesn't matter that the rest of the frame is kind of weak. You want to own as much of the frame as you can. And by just being aware of the fixed elements and the fluid elements when you're building a composition, I think it will do just that for you. Hope you like this video. If you want to find out more about the Candid Frame, which is my podcast, which I've been doing for the last 13.5 years, you can go to thecandidframe.com, and there you can stream the episodes. It's also available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Our most recent interview was with Sophie Mayan. I had a hard time pronouncing her name correctly. Forgive me. She's been working on a personal project of portraits of people with scars. And some of these scars may have come from car accidents. They may have come because of illnesses, surgeries, violence, any variety of different ways. And the beautiful thing about this project is these people are basically reclaiming their bodies by posing for Sophie and creating some very intimate and powerful images, because these people also tell the stories of their scars. And most importantly, it's an opportunity for them to reclaim their bodies and to shirk off that shame that they've often felt associated with these disfigurements or these scars on their bodies. It's really inspiring. And Sophie's story in terms of how she approaches fashion and glamour photography, which this project came out as an extension of that is really, really interesting. So check it out by visiting thecandidframe.com. Take a listen. And if you like what you hear, subscribe. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, spread the word, and I'll see you next time.